That's why organizations like this County Republican Party are so very, very important. Thank you very much for what you do, and all of you deserve a big hand because I appreciate what you're doing. It's also a special privilege for me to be here and to celebrate the 100th birthday anniversary of Ronald Reagan. As Ralph mentioned, I had a very small piece of my life when I got a chance to serve in his White House. I was appointed as White House fellow and had a chance to serve both at Treasury and at the White House. And while I didn't have a lot of opportunities, I did have several opportunities to interact with him in very small and kind of personal settings. And I can tell you that he was the gentleman in private that he was in public. He was a gentleman that was very, very comfortable with himself. I think all of us think back to that time and that leadership, that strong conservative leadership, that unabashedly put America #1. And look back at that with very fond memories. I think all of us have probably different principles of Ronald Reagan we think of or vignettes that we associate. To me, there's three of them. Three of them that I think back to. All of them emblematic of the principles that we need in leaders. You know, one is the idea that a leader needs to strategize, to look beyond, to think what a vision is. I think back to the challenges of something that we probably take for granted today. And that's when there was this thing called the Soviet Union and there was this country called the United States. And that was the battle. Well, every president prior to Ronald Reagan had thought of that conflict in terms of a military battle. But he didn't think of it in military battle terms. He had a different vision. That vision led to victory. Because he thought of it in economic terms. He understood that the United States, with all of its inherent strengths, with the free enterprise system, could fundamentally beat the Soviet Union, not on the battlefield where the cost would be to human life, but instead he understood that by taking them economically, he could accomplish the same thing. And that's exactly what he did with Star Wars. He put Star Wars on the table in the Soviet Union at that point. Mikhail Gorbachev, sitting in a room in Reykjavik, Iceland, understood that the game was over. Because the Soviet Union couldn't play the game economically. They couldn't put enough chips on the table to compete. And that was the fall. You think of someone related to that had the perseverance, kind of the determination. You know, we saw a little bit earlier that speech that he made. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. Well, what you may not know is he put that in 3 times and speechwriters took it out 3 times. But he understood what that message could mean. And not a message to the people that were there gathered, but the real people he was talking to. The people that he knew desired and had a hunger for freedom. Because it was that hunger and freedom that he prized so much. And then the third instance is one which is fundamentally just principles. I can tell you that there are issues. Issues that to me are matters of faith, sanctity of life. They transcend politics. They ought to come from our faith and our principles. Well, one of the great stories about Ronald Reagan, it was when he was first running for governor of California. Like so many politicians, there were people that were trying to mold exactly what the message would be. And he had some of those when they stopped and were now getting to abortion. That were telling me, you know, in California, this probably isn't an issue we should touch. And Ronald Reagan stood up and said, no, there's a right and there's a wrong. And I'm against abortion. He understood, like I hope you do, that there's issues that are based on faith. And that's what the importance are. You know, Ronald Reagan understood and said many times that the freedoms, the liberty that we have are only one generation from being lost. He understood how important a legacy was and how special the United States was as a country. My mother was born in the same year that Ronald Reagan was. I was raised by her after my dad died when I was very young, and he left her with a lot of problems. But she, like so many people of that generation, never asked for anything. She just went out each and every day and worked hard because she didn't have a choice. She had to support me. But what her goal was to ensure that she gave and our country gave something to me and my generation that was better and stronger than what she had. I had a conversation with my daughter, Catherine, not too long ago. Catherine's 20 years old and in college. And we sat down at one of those times of just father and daughter going back and forth. Catherine said, "You know, Dad, it's going to be very different for me." I said, "Well, what do you mean, Catherine?" She said, "Well, you understand that my generation is not going to do near as well as yours. My generation is not going to have a better quality of life. We're not going to have any more economic opportunities. My generation is going to take a step back." And think about that for a moment. Think about the bulwark of our nation. A nation that has always passed on something stronger and better. Not only just as a legacy to generations, but strengthening of a country, saying that there's something special about the United States. To me, that's unacceptable. You know, I've run a lot of different businesses, and I've had a chance to build businesses. Proud to say, create thousands of different jobs. I was one of those people that actually signed both sides of a paycheck. Understand how an economy works. And I can tell you today that I don't believe our country is more competitive today than it was 20 years ago. My guess is if I asked you to raise your hand, I might have one or two of you that would say so, but most of you would say no, we're not more competitive. And then the real test. If I turn and ask you, with the current track that we're on, do you believe that we're going to be more competitive in 10 or 20 years? And my guess is even less hands would come up. And indeed, that's the real challenge that we have as a nation. It's those national economic issues. It's why this generation doesn't feel that we're going to pass on a legacy that's stronger and better. We have today a government in Washington, and the reality is there are just not enough good guys like Ralph. That's overspending, that's overtaxing, that's overregulating. And when you do that, I can tell you as a business person, you destroy jobs, you don't create them. And the challenge that we have as a country is making some tough choices. I made a lot of tough choices. Tough choices in running a business, tough choices in Dallas trying to deal with spending issues. Those aren't easy, I understand. But here's what's at stake. Today we have politicians, too many of them, that have traded off the long term for the short term. We have spending programs that have been put in place with one reason in mind. It was to get elected in the next election cycle. Didn't make for a better nation. And the reality of it is, at the end of the first fiscal year, we didn't have anything to show for it. But it did satisfy constituencies. That's the same thing that's happening in Wisconsin today. Politicians decided that they could kowtow to some public unions by giving away extra pension benefits and things like that. Not a problem because that's 20 years away. I don't have to worry about that. Well, here's the message. 20 years is today. As a nation, we have a debt today of $14 trillion. $14 trillion. We're in the hole $1.5 trillion each year. It's almost hilarious to see in Washington the debate between one group is will we cut $30 billion or will we cut $60 billion?